everyone, I'm here to do my next wrap up. This one's only going to focus on 3 things because I kind of want to get these books back to the library, and I think I'm going to have a lot of thoughts about these books, and I don't want to make this video too long like my last wrap up videos have been lately. So the first book that I want to talk about is What Happened by Hillary Rodham Clinton. I mostly listened to this on audiobook. I read some of it on ebook, and then the physical book finally came for me at the library, but I was already done with the audiobook. I need to return this so the other 120 people that are waiting in line can get to it. But this book obviously goes through Hillary Clinton's campaign, her election loss, and the disappointment that came after that. I really recommend the audiobook because it felt like it propelled the book a lot better for me and made me keep reading really quickly, whereas when I was reading it on ebook it was taking me a bit longer to get through. Some of my favorite things about this book is how positive and optimistic she remains even after all that happened in 2016 and all that is happening now. I needed to hear that. As someone who kind of waffles between being like government can really fix our problems and we just need to elect great leaders and work together and make this society and our country a better place, and other times I am very cynical and I really think government can't do anything for us and the people that we elect are so incompetent at doing their job. Since the election, I've definitely been more of the latter of thinking that things are just going wrong and we have nobody who can really help us. So hearing her take on what happened and that she can still believe that we have better days ahead for us and our future is still bright, that's something that's inspirational to me and that I'm glad that I can read sometimes to kind of bring me down a few notches from being so mad. I'll mention 3 chapters that I loved most. One was definitely one of the beginning ones, and it was about women in politics and why representation matters. She phrased it in a way of, oh, you think people just say that to be nice, but that she really actually believes that representation is going to make things different in our government and something that she really looks forward to. It's not an argument she needs to sell me on, but just the way that she did it. It was really impactful for me and just made me really tearful and made me feel just really happy to want to support more women candidates. I also really loved hearing how she discussed the Russian interference into our election. She puts together a pretty good timeline using journalists and what we know and intel that we know. Like looking back at all the things that we could have done or we should have talked more about. I guess not believing that another government would try to do this, and also just like a takedown of all the people who believe that it's nonsense that this occurred, and a takedown of Putin himself. Like I really believe truly she would have been stronger on foreign policy than domestic policy had she become president. Just being tough on these situations and being no nonsense about it. I really liked how she put it all together and how she came across in that chapter. In one of the chapters she described meeting the mothers of the movement, answering tough questions from them, kind of owned up to her own stuff, but also defended her beliefs. I think as a political figure in 50 years, in 100 years, in 200 years, we will remember Hillary Clinton. I just like the way that she's very pragmatic, and I'm really appreciative that she came out with this book and is basically saying to all of us, I'm not going to be silent through this. Even though I lost, it does not mean I'm going to disappear from the world, and nobody's really going to shut me up. Through all the things that I've been through, I'm still here and I'm going to remain here. I support that, and while I think that it's time for there to be new people in the Democratic Party, and she agrees with that, I won't forget Hillary Clinton anytime soon, and I'm still really proud of the way that I voted this past year. So on to some quotes that I can read to you from her book. Something I wish every man across America understood is how much fear accompanies women throughout our lives. So many of us have been threatened or harmed. So many of us have helped friends recover from a traumatic incident. It's difficult to convey what all this violence does to us. It adds up in our hearts and our nervous systems. Sexism is all the big and little ways that society draws a box around women and says, you stay in there. This one too, because it's me. Over the years, I've hired and promoted a lot of young women and young men. Much of the time, this is how it went. Me: I'd like you to take on a bigger role. Young man: I'm thrilled. I'll do a great job. I won't let you down. Young woman: are you sure I'm ready? I'm not sure. Maybe in a year? These reactions aren't innate. Men aren't naturally more confident than women. We tell them to believe in themselves, and we tell women to doubt themselves. We tell them this in a million ways, starting when they're young. We've got to do better, every single one of us. What would happen if one woman told the truth about her life? This one is about people who voted for Donald Trump. But too many of Trump's core supporters do hold views that I find, there's no other word for it, deplorable. And while I'm sure a lot of Trump supporters had fair and legitimate reasons for their choice, it is an uncomfortable and unavoidable fact that everyone who voted for Donald Trump, all 62,984,825 of them, made the decision to elect a man who bragged about sexual assault, attacked a federal judge for being Mexican, and grieving Gold Star parents who were Muslim, and has a long and well-documented history of racial discrimination in his businesses. That doesn't mean every Trump voter approved of those things, but at a minimum, they accepted or overlooked them, and they did it without demanding the basics that Americans used to expect from all presidential candidates, from releasing tax returns to offering substantive policy proposals to upholding common standards of decency. That's one thing that I think I'll never get personally. I know people who voted for Donald Trump, and I just have to say that I understand economic uncertainty and I understand all the things that go into this vote, but I will never get past the fact that they said that that was all right and they were like, put it aside, and still decided to vote for this man. And that's where I'll end this review. The next book that I will talk about is Killers of the Flower Moon, and this book looks into dozens of murders that occurred in the Osage Nation in Oklahoma during the early 1920s. It also looks at the founding of the FBI and how big of a role the FBI took in these cases. Overall, I thought that this book had a lot going for it when I was starting it. It is an important and unknown history, especially the way that it discusses the greed, prejudice, and injustice that allowed this to happen, and that was really prevalent in Oklahoma in the 1920s, especially when we're discussing head rights, and also the law that was passed by Congress in 1921 that said that anybody with 50% or more Osage blood had to have a guardian overlooking their financial affairs because they weren't competent enough to oversee their own affairs. And I really think that this law is so important to this book and how it let all of these murders occur, because it created an environment and an atmosphere where having this person that you are overseeing and guarding die is actually going to help you get their head right and their land, which is very valuable and rich. From all of that you've gathered, this story sounds really, really fascinating, interesting, important, something that I'm very fascinated to learn more about. But I think the problem here is that the story was not well told in this book. There were just so many extraneous facts that were mumbled and jumbled in this book. There were so many people that we were following that I never really got a sense of anybody. There were just so many random stories pummeled in here that didn't really bring the story from A to B to C to D to make you understand what's going on, what's the course of events, and who am I supposed to care about. We're following families of the deceased, we're following the deceased and their lives, we're following the FBI and who leads the FBI and who's leading this case by the FBI, we're following the people who committed these crimes. We're just following a lot of historical figures too. It's just a lot of people to keep track of in my head, and that I think was the worst thing, because even when we get the revelation of what happened and how this occurred, I didn't really remember who these people were. I had trouble understanding how they were connected to everybody that was central to this book. So discovering what ended up happening was interesting enough for me, but I will have to say that this book was not as great as I wanted it to be. Last but not least, I want to talk about Young Jane Young by Gabrielle Zevin. This is her new release, and I was really excited about this book because I am a Zevin fan. I really had high expectations for this book, especially the way that it was being touted as taking on slut shaming and taking on, political affairs. I thought that Zevin would do a good job with that premise. And while I still enjoyed my time here, like I didn't hate this book and I didn't DNF it, I didn't really care for these characters and I didn't really care for what ended up happening throughout the course of the story. I think that this book didn't really bring anything new to the table in this discussion about politics and affairs in politics and women in politics. So it follows a young woman, obviously, who has been involved with a politician, and this affair comes to light, and she's tarnished, but he's fine, and so she moves away, starts a new life. She kind of resents the fact that she never really got to go into politics like she intended to when she was younger. She suffers all the repercussions of this coming to light, but the man doesn't. The politician doesn't, even though he is the one in power, even though he is older than her, etc., etc. So the way that the story is told is through 4 people, point of views, and it follows the young woman, of course, it follows her mother, it follows the young woman's daughter, but later on, it also follows the politician's wife. So it has a lot of interesting points of views that I think could have really added to the story, but I just feel like they were positioned in incorrect places, and we kind of go back and forth between time. I also feel like this book was just lacking in substance, like it needed more space, it needed more meat in it. The quirky characters ended up being a bit corny for for me towards the end, especially when we're trying to deliver this message, which is a little bit of a disappointment because I had really high hopes for this one. I'm not signing off on Gabrielle Zevin, but I do think Storied Life of AJ Fikry is her strongest work yet. And that is it for me for the 3 books that I wanted to wrap up for this video. I hope that you enjoyed listening to my thoughts. If you want to read any of these or if you read any of these, let me know down below, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.